Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hello and welcome to another episode of Justice for All TV. Today we'll be discussing and highlighting the situation of the Rohingya people who have been battling for their own survival in Burma, Bangladesh, and India. One of our very first campaigns, Burma Task Force, has dealt with the systematic ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya people from their homeland in Burma by the military, the Tatmadaw, and the government of Aung San Suu Kyi, resulting in a genocide that has been recognized the world over. To get an introduction and overview of our work, please do visit burmataskforce.org, where you can find all of our action alerts, reports, statements, as well as justiceforall.com. In our episode today, we will be talking to Adam Carroll, who is the director of our UN programs in New York for Justice for All, and who has been working with the Burma Task Force for several years. We will also be discussing the ICJ ruling report, which was released by Justice for All on March 2020. I want to just share some headlines before we move on from current, so you can see what all Burma has been experiencing in recent days. And I will bring on Adam Carroll.
Hello.
Hello, Brother Adam, and it's good to see you. It's hope all is well, considering you're in New York and with COVID-19, and hope you're healthy and your family as well. So thank you so much for joining us today. This is the first time we're going broadcasting on Burma Task Force's Facebook page. If you want to say hello to our viewers, please go ahead and give us a little more background of what all you do for Justice for All.
Well, Assalamualaikum everybody, and as we almost arrive in Ramadan, I hope it will be a very challenging one, but I hope it will be blessed for everyone. I work with Burma Task Force program here in New York. I direct the programs at the United Nations where we're accredited. And we work and partner with other NGOs to put pressure on the international community to do a lot more. There is a lot of work behind the scenes, but sometimes this work is frustrating. Rohingya are still in the camps in Bangladesh. And today our focus is the impact of COVID. As special updates at the moment, a lot of them have to do with the impact of the coronavirus on the displaced people of the world. The trend we see in Burma, as in other countries, is an authoritarian clampdown on movement and communications. The Burmese military has refused to start a ceasefire, even though many of the ethnic militias in the ethnic states of Burma have agreed to do so. The UN Secretary General Guterres actually called on the world's armies and militias to stand down, and it's quite notable that the Burmese Tatmadaw military has refused. In fact, they've used this crisis situation as an excuse to not only clamp down on journalists and the free flow of information, but to escalate their bombing, not only in Rakhine State, where the Rohingya and the Rakhine people live, but in Chin State. So it's unfortunate. They are also taking this opportunity to compete with Aung San Suu Kyi's civilian government, even on COVID. Aung San Suu Kyi in mid-month of March established its own commission to deal with the COVID crisis. And by the way, as of now, there's officially 111 cases in Burma. Of course, we all think that the actual numbers are much more. And some of the government ministers themselves have started to come down with cases of COVID. But in response to the official commission on the crisis, the Burmese military created their own commission to compete with it. And they didn't invite Aung San Suu Kyi or her health minister to even participate. And they are using that as a cover to crack down on journalists and free movement. So again, this is the trend, authoritarian response.
So this is, and this brings us right up to the work that you have been doing and gathering information on to support the case in the International Court of Justice. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the recent report that Justice for All issued on Burma and for the March report. So if you could go into a little bit on that for the viewers, you can view this report on the Justice for All website. The February report is out and the March report is out as well.
That's right. Thanks, Sister Hannah. For the last 2 months, we've written reports on the Burmese military and government's compliance with the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, which in late January 2020 issued 4 directives that are binding, legally binding on the government of Burma to prevent further genocide, to protect evidence and gather evidence, and basically protect the Rohingya from further harm. We see that the rights of Rohingya have not been restored at all. We see that instead there's military escalation and no prospect of Rohingya return. I would also add that religious freedom has not been restored either through the end of the 1982 citizenship laws, which target the Rohingya, or the race and religion laws of 2015. Ramadan in Burma, every year, even in Yangon, even outside Rakhine State, Burmese officials really harass local mosques and don't allow a lot of prayer to take place. It's not 100%. There are prayers, and of course now with COVID, many of the mosques should probably be closed. But I did want to mention that there's the Committee for the Restoration of Destroyed and Prohibited Mosques in Myanmar, which formed last October. It's drawn up a list of 64 destroyed or shuttered mosques and madrasas in 11 states and regions which should be allowed to rebuild or reopen. Actually, it had identified 170 structures, but they had no ability to access the other states like Rakhine State where there's still conflict. So the checkpoints and the restrictions on freedom of movement has prevented them from being fully inclusive. But in fact, none of these mosques have been rebuilt, and the authorities use various bureaucratic maneuvers to prevent even canvas tents outside for prayers. So the freedom of religion is a problem overall in the country as regarding Muslims. There's also an ongoing Islamophobia. As you know, that's an aspect of the promotion of anti-Rohingya policies. And recently, a pastor, David Law, from Toronto, Canada, has been stirring up anti-Rohingya sentiment. And he's like a Christian version of Wiratu, the monk. And he has also declared that Christians can't get COVID, but now he's come down with COVID, according to the news reports. So, so this is unfortunate. We're dealing with these negative influences on freedom of religion. There is no restoration of rights. There is no safety for the Rohingya. We can't really say that the government is in compliance. However, I should say that they may next month when they have to report to the International Court of Justice about their 3-month efforts to comply, I'm sure they're going to come up with certain things. And one thing they may report is the news that the government has released hundreds of Rohingya who were arrested.
Mhm.
And but the problem with that, and this happened just a few days ago for the New Year's celebration in April
Yes.
for in Burma, um, they were released. Why were they even in jail? They were in jail because they were trying to um, travel freely in their own country, and that's against the law. So they were released, but unfortunately, and I should say, fortunately, 25,000 prisoners have been released overall. Most of them are Burmese Buddhists. They're released because of COVID, and they're being sent to their homes. The Agence France Presse reports that 800 Rohingya have been sent back to Rakhine State, where they have no rights and they are not safe, but they've been sent back by ship, by Navy ship, and they're going to be supposedly put in quarantine, which is another form of jail. But we'll see. At least it's not the dangerous conditions that Human Rights Watch has deplored in Burma. So again, the Burmese government may point to this release as a positive uh, uh, development, but it's a very complicated thing. The UN, the killing of a UN personnel just this week, delivering testing samples in Rakhine State is very unfortunate. We have made a statement on our website, and other NGOs have done the same. It's unclear who killed the person, but the conditions of uh, in Rakhine State created by the Burmese military created a dangerous situation, a lack of free flow of information and many checkpoints. And so we are calling for an independent investigation into the killing and hopefully not propaganda from the Burmese government. So we'll see is responsible, and hopefully the truth will come out.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yes, we just released a condemnation of the killing of the WHO worker, and it's terrible that people who are on the front lines, who are working to save the people of the land, are the ones who are being targeted in Rakhine State. So, keeping that in mind, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the ongoing digital hate. You had talked about Ramadan and the the attitude towards Muslims in Burma, whether they're Rohingya or not. Um, but the Burma Human Rights Network released a large report on digital hate from ministers, from lay people, continuously against Muslims, Arabs, the Rohingya themselves. But Islamophobia is a large part of the dialogue or the language on the ground in Burma. So if we could talk a little bit about that, that would be great. Oops.
True, that's been the case all along. The Islamophobia is promoted on Facebook. Facebook has failed to uh, effectively shut that down. Over the last 4 or 5 years, civil society groups in Burma have continuously asked for Facebook to do that. They've gotten better in the last year, certainly, but they are not able or willing to stop all the military uh, uh, directed hate. The military, uses the um, the monks in their drive to marginalize the Rohingya minority. There's often a profit motive because Rohingya villages are seized and their assets stolen, and uh, development projects are created in their lands, which they don't profit from. But so hatred and economic gain are linked, unfortunately. As far as this ongoing promotion of hate and anti-Muslim hate specifically, of course, this is a regional trend. We're seeing this elsewhere in Sri Lanka, in India, and so forth. Um, with And often the military will try to depict all Muslims as security threats, as terrorists, and so forth. They're now doing that, however, with some of the Buddhist groups, the Rakhine Army, called Arakan Army. They have now finally declared that a terrorist organization, and any journalists who even speak to them for their news reports are rounded up, arrested, and so forth. So there's
Yes, so,
again a
so
crackdown.
and also with the ICJ case, there's
Mm.
been a trend in Burma that this was a collusion of Islamic countries against Burma. And so Islamophobia has seen a rise because of that as well, where Burma's the victim and the big bad Muslims are the ones who are actually responsible for the bad image of Burmese generals and militia.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. And that's been the messaging from the Burmese military for many years, and the the response to the ICJ court case in Burma was one of nationalism and defensiveness.
Mhm.
And every politician is using it to get ahead. It's very unfortunate, but it's not surprising. At the same time, this pressure of the ICJ on Burma may eventually force some reforms.
Mhm.
So we still think that it's very important. It establishes the Rohingya as a protected class. It gives them the dignity of their name,
Mhm.
and it really does ramp up the pressure on Burma. We think that over time this may actually work. As we all know, the Burmese national elections are coming up at the
Mhm.
end of 2020. We don't know if COVID will impact that. We do think that the conflict in some of the ethnic states, including Rakhine State, may prevent voting in those places.
Okay.
So it's going to be very difficult to see if it's going to be a free and fair election. But that said, the politicians will be competing and are likely to vilify the Rohingya in the run up to the election
Mm,
in November.
definitely. So I wanted to show a clip of a tweet um, uh, of recently. This is shared by Voice of America that at least 382 Rohingya refugees were rescued off the coast of Bangladesh on Wednesday. And this is something that is terrifying to watch as we look at it and we see how these, as they're landing on the ground, and they've been at sea, they've been rejected by Malaysia, and now recently we heard that Bangladesh is also rejecting any more boats that are coming into the shores at Bangladesh. So could you speak a little bit about that?
Well, it's true. On the 16th of April, Malaysian authorities refused to allow a fishing trawler to disembark with about 200 Rohingya, and this came a day after the Bangladeshis authorities rescued a boat of 396 Rohingya refugees that had failed in its attempt to reach Malaysia. And The survivors said that both Malaysian and Thai authorities had prevented the boat to land numerous times, and 28 individuals died over the course of the journey. This reminds us of the Andaman Sea crisis, where many boat people died in 2015, and the neighboring states refused to allow them. At the time, the U.S. government was actually quite helpful and airlifted supplies to the boats. They responded to everyone's requests to help. It was a humanitarian disaster that ended up finally allowing most of them to land. But Uh, in this case, governments are using the fear of COVID as a reason or rationalization to reject these migrants. And they do have the right under international law to arrive. And so we call on them, all of them, to allow, yes, put them in quarantine for the correct number of days, but allow them safe haven. This is another example of the way governments are clamping down on international human rights and movements specifically. They are also clamping down on communications. And in Rakhine State, of course, there has been a ban on internet service for many months now in at least 9 townships, and it's quite an extensive region. This
Um,
prevents any kind of uh, reporting about the virus, not to mention other things. Yes.
Brother Adam, I'd like to show our viewers because sometimes it's hard to imagine what some of these refugees are going through. So I would like to
Yes.
show this clip to our viewers.
আপনারা দেখুন এই যে এরা হচ্ছে বর্তমানে এই ইয়া থেকে আসছে, ওরা ওরা বুট থেকে উদ্ধারকৃত। ওরা দীর্ঘ 2-3 মাস পরে আজকে উদ্ধারকৃত, বর্তমান তাদেরকে উদ্ধার করা হচ্ছে। আপনারা দেখুন খুব বাজেভাবে তারা আসলে খুব কাহিল, তাদের হাঁটার উপক্রম তাদের নেই। আপনারা দেখুন তাদের অবস্থা দেখুন, আপনারা তারা আসলে খুব ক্লান্ত বলে আমার মনে হচ্ছে। যে এই যে ওনাকে একটু হেল্প করে নেয়, ওনাকে এইবারে ধরে নাকি এইবারে ধরে যা, এইবারে ধরতে এইবারে ধর এই যে
It takes sometimes we're so far removed from the crisis because we're here and they're there that we forget what is going on the ground, and we think the genocide is over. These people would not be leaving their homes and the safety if they were safe, especially in a pandemic. And they've been on the sea for weeks, and for governments to turn them away is and so let's talk a little bit about what we can do to end some of this, like to put pressure on these governments. What can the average person on the street who sees videos like this coming out, what can they do um, to address this?
Well, I mean, there are so many needs, specifically about demanding governments abide by international law and allow safe haven to refugees and migrants. The U.S. government is also lacking in that, as we all know. It's important to ask all governments to abide by law. And I would say, though, that we have at Justice for All Burma Task Force weekly newsletters and action alerts. They always include actions on the issue of the Rohingya, and we have been asking for response on a number of things in recent weeks. I'd like to take a moment to uh, mention some of those actions, which you can find on our website and our app. One is addressing the lack of communications that I started to mention, both the clampdown on internet in Rakhine State, Burma, which prevents any medical, people getting access to hospitals or medicine or reporting acts of violence. There's a reason why there's no communication, and it's to prevent us from knowing. So we're asking people to contact Telenor Myanmar to ask them not to take down websites of the political groups, not to keep a clampdown on communications in Rakhine State. And also along those lines, today, as you know, Sister Hannah, there was news about the House Foreign Affairs
Yes, that was.
Committee,
Mhm.
which has come out with a new statement about the clampdown on internet and communications in the Bangladeshi camps, where we've got over 1 million Rohingya at great risk for infection of the disease.
Let's
Only
talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about what it took for that statement to come out. It didn't just appear out because of the goodness of the hearts of the people in the Foreign Affairs Committee. What work went on behind the scenes for that letter to come out?
behind the scenes, a number of NGOs, including our own, have been putting constant pressure on elected officials, many of whom have signed this statement today. These officials are heads of various committees and subcommittees in the Senate and in the House. And Burma Task Force is certainly active in Washington, D.C., in keeping the lawmakers informed and keeping some pressure on them to take action. We want to see more legislation passed. We know that it's a crisis time, but at least it's good to see that these lawmakers, and quite important ones, Senator Markey, Congressman Engel, a number of others have signed on to this. It's important to keep the pressure, which is another reason why we have these action alerts on a regular basis, which we hope that listeners today will engage with, because numbers add up. This is how it works. If they hear from 5 of you, great. If they hear from 10 of you, better. Numbers count. And so because we have a large mailing list, we have the potential, if people will respond and if they will care about their sisters and brothers, the Rohingya community, then we can actually keep this as a priority issue. It's a genocide. Many of our Jewish sisters and brothers also understand about genocide because of the Holocaust. And the anniversary of the Holocaust has just passed a few days ago, at least the official date, which I think is the 24th of November. I mean, of April. And so, we have allies from all kinds of communities who understand the suffering and the importance of stopping genocide. So we need to be part of that as Muslim Americans. We need to be part of a fully inclusive coalition to take action. So I hope that people will engage with our action alerts, to go to our website, go to our app, and try to make this restore justice. The root causes are the xenophobia, the anti-Muslim hysteria, and the military abuses, the power struggle in Burma. These can be addressed eventually. We need to educate Burmese people, who are otherwise not necessarily bad people, that Rohingya deserve full rights and inclusion too. This is a social justice struggle. We should understand that as Americans with our own history, and we should try to encourage them to do the right thing, inshallah.
Inshallah. Well, thank you so much for being here and being a part of this discussion. I'm going to invite, so everybody knows that yesterday was um, Earth Day, and so we will be discussing a little bit about the Rohingya refugee crisis through the lens of climate change. And for that, I'm going to invite Shahab Khan, who is our outreach director in Canada, and who's been engaging with this um, the crisis through the lens of climate change and been tweeting about it. So welcome, Shahab. So we wanted to have a little bit of a discussion. If you could share with us what is the status, and we understand that the camps are built, especially in Bangladesh. Miles and miles of forests have been taken down to accommodate the camps, which has resulted in a lot of tension with the local community as well over there. So, could you shed a little light on that?
Yep. First of all, thank you for having me on. The climate change and the environmental impact of refugees is hardly discussed, and I'm glad that we're taking the time today to do that. I want to thank Adam for that discussion. A lot of the topics that he discussed are unknown, and I'm glad that Justice for All and the other NGOs are bringing these up. There's two things happening right now. There's two events happening right now with the Rohingya people. There's the ethnic cleansing, the mass genocide, the refugee camps that's occurring on the border of Myanmar, India, and Bangladesh. The second thing, which doesn't get talked about, is the environmental impact that is occurring right now. There will be a day when the Rohingya people get to go back to their homeland in Burma, Myanmar. But how will the camps, how will Bangladesh be left environmentally? How will Bangladesh be able to pick itself up after what has happened or what will happen? And hopefully it stops very soon. So with the situation with the people and the refugee crisis, we know what has happened in the past. We know what's happening now. We know there's a solution. We're just trying to get to that solution. But with the environmental change and the climate change that is occurring right now, we have no idea of the solution. We have no idea of the impact. Now, Bangladesh itself is one of the most densely populated nation states, countries in the world. It's built on, I'm not gonna say millions, it's built on 100 different rivers and tributaries that all empty out into the ocean. Now, imagine having 1.1 million refugees living in camps in the middle of these tributaries and soil. Bangladesh is a rice producing, wheat producing nation. Now, these people living in these camps, there's soil degradation, there's unhealthy living standards, there's poverty, there's lack of food. The last thing, and there's lack obviously of safety. The last thing on these refugees' minds is in the environment and the effect to climate. The 1.1 million people that are there, do you think they care about CO2 emissions? Do you think that they care about the soil is degrading? No, they're just looking for the next place to sleep. They're looking for the next food that they can eat, and they're thinking of how quickly they can go back to their homes. Hopefully that happens very soon. So that's the situation environmentally. Yes, yesterday was Earth Day, and I took it upon myself as well as some of our partners just to let people know that when there's a mass displacement of people, it affects not only the country they're leaving, it affects the country they're entering, and it affects that in the climate situation. There's already a lack of food in Bangladesh and a lack of security. Imagine what this is doing to Bangladeshi citizens. Imagine how they feel. We don't have enough for ourselves, and now we're asked to help the Rohingya people. And in general, the Bangladeshi people have been great. They've accepted them. They've, like you said, they've deforested their own land. They've built these camps out of the money coming in from outside NGOs. But people in Bangladesh aren't looking at the future. So that's what I'm trying to bring up. I'm trying to bring up the fact that first of all, we have no idea what's going on to the states in Burma, but we know what's going on in Cox's Bazar. We know what the environmental effect could be. We just need to get the solution out there.
Adam, do you have anything to comment on this?
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I think that given the global aspect of this environmental catastrophe that's looming, it may make this COVID crisis look quite small. And as far as the impact on Rohingya or Bangladeshis or Burmese people, it's climate justice is an important framework. Are the local people being included in any profit? Is it sustainable for the or are people trying to make a quick buck? And we see outside investors from Asia, but from around the world as well, are just descending on these countries, trying to make money. And it's a huge concern. Who loses out? It's the people who actually live there.
Sure. Well, thank you so much to both of you for being here today and for our viewers for listening. Every day when we're working on these crises, a new thing comes up, new aspects of the terrible act, it's a butterfly effect. One nation decides to take action against a group of people, but what it has done around the world and around in Bangladesh, in Malaysia, in Thailand, where all these people are now living as refugees and suffering and struggling. Hopefully, we will come back with a show on the global refugee crisis and talk about issues pertaining to that. I'd like you to join us tomorrow again at 3 o'clock, where we will be discussing India, Islamophobia in India, and be talking about the several actions that we have asked our supporters to take about the crisis in India. We want to prevent what has happened to the Rohingya people, and we want to prevent that from happening in the nation of India. Thank you for joining us. This was Justice for All Now. We hope to continue bringing these shows to you. And please leave comments. Let us know what parts you enjoyed, what more you'd like to see, what topics you'd like us to discuss. Thank you so much. Goodbye.